Thank you so much, Jerry, for leading us in this online format and also in person this morning. Just really great friend just to come across the river and be willing to jump in and lead us in worship whenever he's available. Just great guy. Just love spending time worshiping with him and with you, both online here and in person as well. And just excited to continue walking through this series we've been going through called Walking with Jesus. And, last week, if you didn't get a chance to be a part of the online message, we talked about Paul's words to Timothy and started off with that. And we talked about how to deal with conflict as a believer. And boy, I tell you, with all the conflict in the world, both worldwide, nationwide, and locally, boy, it's just a great time to reflect. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that, I highly recommend that you check out our Facebook posts. You can just kind of scroll down our page. You'll find the previous week, or you can go to our YouTube channel. And I hope it doesn't sound like self-promotion and like, hey, watch this. We really want to get our likes and our watches up. That's not it at all. I really feel like as we've been walking through this series, Walking with Jesus, that each week that God's been revealing some different ways that as believers and as truly disciples, because that's what we want to be. We don't want to just be folks that raised our hand at church one time and said, I repent, I ask for forgiveness of my sins, and Jesus, I ask you to lead my life. We want to start with that and then continue to follow him and be his disciples and continue to grow deeper in our discipleship walk. And that's what Walking with Jesus is all about. So last week, message on conflict, it's everywhere. This week's going to be a little different. During this time we've been looking at, sometimes it's I guess you could say a theme or a topic, like last week was conflict. And sometimes it's learning lessons from somebody who walks side by side with Jesus. Sometimes it's lessons from Jesus' words himself. And sometimes it's words from Paul to somebody else and those lessons. And today's going to be a little different. We're going to be looking at lessons from Luke. Now we're talking about walking with Jesus. And here's the thing. We're going to be learning lessons from somebody who walked with Jesus, kind of. And the reason I say kind of, well, let me just ask you a couple of questions here. Wherever you're at right now, raise your hand if you think Luke was one of the original 12 disciples. Raise your hand right now if you think that Luke was Jewish. Okay, if your hand was up for either one of those, I tricked you. Luke was not one of the original 12 disciples. And Luke, we believe, was not Jewish. And the reason we think that Luke wasn't Jewish was we see him really jumping in the first church in the book of Acts, but specifically in Colossians chapter 4. And we're actually going to read a little snippet of Colossians 4 in just a little bit here. But in Colossians chapter 4, Paul, writing this letter to the church at Colossae, or Coloss, however you say it, he's writing this letter, and he lists these people, and he lists a few specific people, and he says, these were the Jewish believers that were with me in my journey. And then, a couple sentences later, he mentions, and Luke says hi. And Luke was clearly with him in that journey, so if he wasn't listed above in the folks that were Jewish believers, then we got to believe that he was a Gentile. In other words, somebody who was not Jewish, who then came to belief in Jesus. So when we say walking with Jesus, we've got this guy who didn't walk with Jesus side by side, wasn't a Jew, so he really wasn't close to Jesus. So why are we saying walking with Jesus from this Luke guy? Well, Luke wrote the book of Luke. And he said, oh yeah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, the third book in the New Testament. And it's like, oh, well, I thought he was writing that because he was walking with Jesus. Well, he also writes the book of Acts. So we know this about him. He writes down all the stuff. We're going to talk about who he's addressing that to and why he wrote it in just a moment here. We know he's a doctor. We're going to talk about that in a minute. We know he accompanied Paul. We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes too. And we know he had an awesome investigative style writing in both the book of Luke and the book of Acts. So with all of that, today we're going to look at the things that Luke shows us and what he shows us. And there's 4 things that I think that we're going to look at. And I'm sure there's tons more. Anytime I give like a number 3 and 4, those are really points to my message, if you will, but they're really not every single lesson we learn. So don't ever think that this is just limited. You might read through the book of Luke or the book of Acts and glean something else and say, you know what, that's something we learned from Luke too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. Always message us and let us know, hey, here's another one. I just love that stuff. But this morning we're going to look at 4 things that Luke shows us how to do. The first one is this. Luke shows us how to carefully investigate Jesus. Now, when I say carefully investigate Jesus, where I'm grabbing this from is in the first part of his writing, in Luke chapter 1. We're going to read verses 1 through 4. This is what he says. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theopolis, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. There it is right there. Luke's starting to write this letter. We call it a book, but truly it's a letter. It's like an account of things. He wasn't really looking to write what we would call a book. And he's writing to this guy Theopolis. And who is Theopolis? Well, it's truly an unknown. There's a lot of theories about it, and some of them are very substantially based. It's likely an individual. And it's likely an individual because it says most excellent Theopolis. It's really kind of tying whoever this Theopolis person is with some sort of, I guess you could say, acclaim or some sort of information that Luke feels very highly of this person. So it's likely a specific person, not a group, or just like an open letter to anybody because of that terminology. And Luke shares right off the top that he carefully investigated this. This is a great lesson for us. Now, it's important to him. Why? Well, because he's a doctor. And doctors tend to investigate things before they do it. So that should be important to use, to us, I should say. It really should be important to us to understand that and see that this is a doctor and he's carefully investigated that. Now, everybody nowadays, and if you're online right now, obviously you have internet access, so you know this concept. Everybody today researches everything nowadays on the internet. Sometimes internet research is not so much research, it's bouncing around until you find somebody who says what you agree with and then call it research. That's a little different. But there used to be a time that some of you remember, we went to this place called a library. And we used this crazy thing called the Dewey Decimal System. And you would look up things in little card files and get out microfiche and slide it around to figure out different articles. And you would do some serious research if you wanted to investigate something. And then you would document your sources and write your paper if it was in college or whatever the case might be. But our guy who's writing today that we're grabbing our lessons from, our guy who's showing us how to do these things, he's a library type of guy. He's not an internet search guy who's just looking for something that sounds to him good. He's I need to get to the bottom of this and find out exactly what this thing is. I need to carefully investigate Jesus so I can share him with others. That's the Luke we're looking at this morning. And he's even going as far to write it all down for somebody else. That's some serious thing. I mean, you know, like you're in college, you have to write a paper for somebody to pass the class, but Luke's not under any obligation here, but he wants to write this down because he wants to share it, and he's carefully investigated it. This man is an investigative journalist. He's more than just a doctor. We should all be like that too. Don't ever just take my word or the word of anyone who preaches on a Sunday or delivers a message and say, okay, the pastor said this, so that's got to be true, or that's the way I should look at it and think about it. Read the Bible. Check archaeological facts to make sure things mount up. See how all the prophecies of the Old Testament are fulfilled in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. You can be your own investigative journalist, and you should be, because if you call yourself a believer, you should carefully investigate what it is you're believing in this Jesus. I was thinking about that this week as we look at Luke, and I thought of a really famous investigative journalist, a man named Lee Strobel. If you don't know Lee Strobel's name, Lee was a newspaper writer for the Chicago Tribune, and he was an investigative journalist. And he did that for over a decade at that paper, which is a pretty big paper, and this was in the 80s and into the 90s. And then Lee's wife had an experience and went to church, and she decided to start following Jesus, and she became a believer. And Lee himself was an atheist, and it didn't really set well with him because he thought his wife was wasting her time and it wasn't important at all. So, Lee, being the good investigative journalist that he was, and being the strong atheist that he was at the time, he decided to go out and prove that Jesus didn't exist, that this was all a sham. But the thing is, as he dug more and more into archaeological facts and reading the Bible and cross-referencing things and checking them out, looking at historical records from the time period or directly after, he could find no evidence to dispute or refute who Jesus was. As a matter of fact, all he could do was find writings confirming what was going on in society, and then all the things in both the Old and New Testament can be archaeologically backed up. And what happened is, at the end of the day, Lee Strobel figured out that Jesus Christ is real, was real, and is still in heaven today. And he became a believer. And he wrote a book called The Case for Christ. And he wrote a ton of books called The Case for Easter and Case for this and Case for that. And they're great reading. We have a few different copies of them at the church. If you ever want one to read or use, please let me know, because they're just great reading. It's one of those books that really belongs in every true apologist's library. Now, apologist is somebody who can defend the Christian faith. And when I say defend, it's not like I'm going to fight you to show this is true. It's quite simply to state the facts and understand who Jesus is and why we believe in him and why he's real. And when you hear the word apology, you think, oh man, somebody's apologizing, saying, I'm sorry that I believe in Jesus. It's not that at all. An apologist is somebody who states facts. And Lee Strobel is a Christian apologist now, who used to be an investigative journalist who was an atheist and came to believe. Paul is an investigative journalist to us today. He's more than a doctor. And the first thing he shows us how to today, he shows us how to carefully investigate Jesus. Because for each and every one of us who calls upon the name of Jesus, we should be reading his word, investigating more about him to know who it is that we're following and why he is the Son of God. Pretty cool first lesson we get there from Luke, but like I said, we're looking at 4 different things today. The second one, because in the same passage, after we hear about how Luke carefully investigates who Jesus is, we hear this. The second thing that Luke shows us how to do, and it's this. Luke shows us how to share the truth. Who? Share the truth. Your truth or my truth? There's only one truth. Let me go back to Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Reread that same passage I read a few moments ago. It says this. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulated among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I have also decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theopolis, so that you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. There's Luke laying it out right then. He's writing to this Theopolis guy, and you might say, well, is this one of his friends? Well, we really don't know. Some people have kind of surmised that maybe he was kind of like Luke's publisher back then. Not that they had like legitimate publishing operations, and obviously they didn't even have books that you'd hand out, but somebody who could maybe transcribe some things or make some things, pass on some information. So in a way, he kind of published Luke's work, if you will. That's one thought about it. And this is somebody, Luke's writing to this guy, Theopolis. He's obviously heard something about Jesus already, because Luke is saying, we're going to talk about the things that you have already heard so that you can be certain of everything that you were taught. So Luke's really able to dive in and share here. And before he said he carefully investigated everything, now he's being careful of not just sharing the story or some accounts, but being careful to say the truth of everything, sharing the truth of everything. If you want real truth in life, you'll only find it in one place, and that's in Jesus Christ. Jesus himself told the disciples this at the Last Supper in John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus told them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. That's a bold statement. And the reason Jesus says it is because it's true. He is God in the flesh. He is the way to heaven. He is the truth, the reality of our God in the flesh. And he is the life eternal that he gives us. And then he reminds us, no one can come to the Father except through him, and the Father is the one who's in heaven. That's big news. And that's some serious truth. And Luke's trying to make sure that Theopolis knows this, and he's sharing the truth so that Theopolis will know the way to heaven and life eternal. It should question us to ask this morning. Are we comfortable and ready to share the truth about Jesus? Are we ready to say to people that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him? That's where it gets kind of muddy for us sometimes, because that statement, no one comes to the Father except through him, it's a pretty exclusive statement. It says, you can't come in to heaven unless you come to Jesus. It makes it like a special club. And some people really get offended by that. But the reality is that Jesus is saying no one comes to the Father, but Jesus is saying, but it's for everybody. He wants everybody to come. And so it becomes something that I think for me and for I think most Christians, sometimes it's hard to share because we want to make sure we say it just right. But you know what's interesting is like sometimes we're willing to share the truth about things to people when there's like a danger involved or something. Do you remember 2017, our high water event of the area, with the issue with the spillway at the Oroville Dam and how dramatic that was, and how this area, if you lived in the Marysville and Yuba City area, you were likely evacuated during that time. If you went to New Beginnings Wesleyan Church at that time, I guarantee you, whether you got the call that day or not, you might have already been evacuated, but the day of the evacuations, I guarantee you, if you were a part of our church at that time, I called your house and tried to talk to you or talk to you on your cell phone to make sure that you were safe, that you knew that there was evacuation, that you had got out, and to find out if there was anything that you needed. I did this because there was a real danger present. And because I love all of you so much, and I love everybody, but because I felt a need to look out for our church, I made sure I called each and every person I could possibly think of, each and every phone number and name that we had in our directory or in my phone or in Chelsea's phone or other people's phones. Because there was this danger, this what I would say this clear and present danger. We had to tell people, hey, did you know you're in danger? I've never taken the time on one specific day to call all of my friends who are not believers in Jesus Christ and say, did you know you're in danger? Did you know you're in danger of this scary thing that nobody likes to talk about called hell, which is a place of eternal torment? Did you know you're in danger of missing out on an eternity in heaven with Jesus? Did you know you're in danger of missing being present with God in heaven forever? See, Luke is spending some time here to share the truth. And Luke teaches us and challenges us to share the truth with people, because the truth, remember that the truth will set you free. When people know the truth about Jesus and when they accept it and believe it and follow him, they can have that joy eternal, because that's where they know they're going to be forever, with Jesus. So this morning, Luke teaches us and shows us how to share the truth. And it's tough sometimes, but it's worth it. What else does Luke show us to do in his example in his life here? Well, the third thing Luke shows us how to is to live it out wherever you are. Live it out. And when I say live it out, it means live out your relationship, your faith in Jesus Christ, wherever you are. That's what Luke shows, the third thing. I want to read just a little blip from Colossians chapter 4, verse 14. I mentioned earlier, I was going to mention this one little blip. Colossians 4:14 says this. By the way, Paul speaking, writing a letter to the Colossian church. He says this: Luke, the beloved doctor, sends his greetings, and so does Demas. And some of you are like, wow, that's the most powerful, moving verse in the entire Bible. No, nobody's saying that, right? Everybody's going, why is that such a big, significant thing? Why is that showing us that Luke It shows us how to live it out, live out a relationship with Christ wherever we are. Why is this significant? What does this passage show us? Well, first off, it shows us Paul's friend's name is Luke. Second thing it shows us is that he is a doctor. And then it shows us his status. And his status among Paul and anybody who was reading that letter from the Colossian church is this: Luke is beloved. Why? Why was he so beloved? Was it because he was a great doctor? No. He wasn't beloved for being the greatest physician that the world had ever seen at the time. He was beloved because he was following Jesus and loving on people wherever he was at. He was living out his relationship wherever he was at and whatever he was doing. In the temple, yes, after he was allowed in there because he's a Gentile. In the marketplace, you betcha, because he was a doctor and he was loving on people there. Did Luke have to be a pastor or work at a church? No. He was just a Christ-loving doctor, and everybody knew it, and they knew him as beloved. Look, wherever God has placed you, live out your relationship with Jesus wherever it is. It doesn't matter what the job is. It doesn't matter if you're retired. It doesn't matter if you can't work. It doesn't matter any of these things. Wherever God has placed you, you need to live out your relationship with Jesus for the folks around you, wherever you are. And I think there's so many great examples in our church, but I know if I was pointing out people in our church, some people would get a little embarrassed or aren't real comfortable with that. So I wanted to just share about somebody in our community that many of you know who really lives out his relationship with Jesus every day and everywhere he goes. It's a friend of mine. His name is John Geyser. And you might say, well, Geyser, that sounds familiar. Sounds like Geyser Pets over on Plymouth Street in Yuba City. You betcha. That's the guy. John Geyser is the pet store owner there. He's also a board member of REST, the Regional Emergency Shelter Team, which we'll be hosting the week before Christmas this year. He's also a member of the Gideons, which passes out free Bibles all over the place there. And this man, if you know him or know his reputation, you'll know that he's beloved. He has helped so many people. There's so many people who have gone to his store and said, I need some help. I need some financial help. I need some counseling help. I need some help. And they just flock there. He has Bibles available to pass out the Word of God to anybody who comes in, and he just helps people whenever he can, and he just shares Christ with them, loves on them, prays for them, and does practical things to love on them all the time. And he just lives out his relationship with Jesus Christ right there in the middle of a pet store. Seems like an unlikely place to live out a relationship with Christ, doesn't it? Might be an unlikely place to live out a relationship with Christ as a doctor. Might be an unlikely place to live out a relationship with Jesus Christ as a retired person in a community where you don't have a specific job that people have to come to you to. You just see folks in your area every day. It might be an unusual place to share Christ when you're unable to work for some reason, and so you meet people in other different ways. Maybe all these things seem unusual or not common to you, but they truly are, because Luke is showing us today that we need to live out a relationship wherever we are and whatever we're doing. It becomes a challenge to us, is just to live that out and do whatever it is that God would ask us to do, so that when people think about us, they think about our name, maybe our position or job in life, but they think about us as beloved because of the love they've seen from us as we follow Christ and love on them. Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome that that's how Luke is known. Last lesson we're going to look at today. After Luke showed us all these things, the last thing that we're going to look at that Luke shows us how to do this morning is this. He shows us to go out and share. Go out and share. And some of you are saying, wait a second, didn't you say share the truth earlier? Yeah, definitely. We need to share the truth with people close to us. Remember, Luke was writing to Theopolis, somebody he knew already, but this is go out and share. This is a little bit different. I want to read a quick verse, a couple verses from the book of Acts. First one's Acts chapter 16, verse 10. Now remember, Luke wrote the book of Acts, and in Acts 16, verse 10, it's in the middle of Paul's second missionary journey, and you hear this quote. So we decided to leave for Macedonia at once, having concluded that God was calling us to preach the good news there. You might think to yourself, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting passage. I don't see what's so important about it. Well, don't forget this. Luke wrote the book of Acts. Let me remind you and read the introduction to Acts. Acts chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. This is what it says. In my first book, I told you, Theopolis, about everything Jesus began to do and teach, until the day he was taken up to heaven and giving his chosen apostles further instructions through the Holy Spirit. During the 40 days after he suffered and died, he appeared to the apostles from time to time, and he proved to them in many ways that he was actually alive, and he talked to them about the kingdom of God. That's Luke's introduction to what we call the book of Acts. And Luke is still writing to his friend or publisher, whoever this person is, Theopolis, and he's shared about Jesus with Theopolis before. In the first book, all the things that happened about Jesus. Now he's sharing about the first church. And guess what? He's in the story now. Dun, 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 dun. Luke has become a featured player in the story. That Acts 16:10 verse I read just a moment ago, the words there say, we decided to leave for Macedonia. We decided to leave. No good writer says we if they're not in the middle of that situation. Because right then and there on Paul's second missionary journey, Luke is side by side with him. If you want to read some exciting stuff about the missionary journey, go a little farther in the book of Acts. Go to the end of the book of Acts. Read Acts chapter 27 and 28. This is a famous story of Paul being shipwrecked on the island of Malta. Most people know it. It's when they get shipwrecked, everybody thinks they're going to die, but they all survive, and Paul prophesied that ahead of time, and then they're building this fire, and this serpent latches onto his arm, and everybody's like, whoa, he must be a real bad sinner, he's going to die, because when serpents or vipers bite you back then, you would die from the poison, and Paul just shakes it off in the fire, goes about his business, and everybody starts to realize, whoa, there's something special about this guy. And guess what? Guess who else was right there by his side? Guess who else was thrown out of the boat and was floating on debris until he got to the shore? You better believe it was Luke. We never talk about this. But here it is, Luke, and he's sharing in this book. He's sharing with Theopolis, and he's going out and sharing this story with Theopolis, so Theopolis will know everything. But in the middle of the story is how he went out and shared Christ with Paul in these missionary journeys. It's really cool because he's sharing with Theopolis writing-wise, and during the middle of that writing, he's showing how he's already gone out and shared with other people, just really showing us that that's what we need to do. And Luke went on this missionary journey, and he shared with so many believers and non-believers alike. You might look at yourself and say, wow, okay, well, so I get it. So we should all go out and become missionaries like Luke, right? That's the logical conclusion there, right? Is we need to do the same thing Luke. If we're learning lessons, if Luke is showing us how to do things, then we should all go out and become missionaries. Remember the other lessons we learned from Luke this morning. First thing was carefully investigate Jesus. You got to understand who Jesus is. Second one was this, share truth. And the third one was live it out wherever you are. At that point, we need to look for God's direction and say, Lord, where do we need to go to share more? And really the prayer for us as your pastoral team right now, and what we're encouraging folks to pray on those prayer times on Friday from 1 to 2. One of the prayers that we are asking is for folks to be asking God, Lord, where should we go as a church right now? Not where should we move as a church, not that at all. Where should we go? Do we need to get involved in some sort of missions? Foreign ones or local ones? Do we need to get involved in a local project? What do we need to do, Lord, if we want to go out and share, just like Luke is showing us this morning? How do we go out and share, and where is that going to be? God, where do you need us to be as a church, and where are you leading us to do these things? That's the prayer. So if you haven't been praying that, if you haven't been to our prayer times, or you haven't heard that prayer, just like to share that with you this morning, to just be lifting it up to God. God, where would you have me, and where would you have us? Lord, where would you have us go out and share? Is it far? Is it near? And how is it? This morning, we're grabbing all these things that Luke has shown us how to do these things in our walk with Jesus. And we're grabbing lessons from a guy about walking with Jesus who likely didn't walk side by side with Jesus, but came to know the truth about Jesus later, and it made a difference in his life, and so he used that to make a difference in other people's lives. Just like you and me. We didn't have the opportunity 2,000 years ago to walk side by side with Jesus for 3 years like the other disciples did. But we were able to learn about him, apply that truth to our lives, and then go out and share those lessons. Luke shows us how to carefully investigate Jesus. We've got to know who it is we're following, and reading the Bible is the best way you can do that. We've got to know how to share the truth and be comfortable sharing who Jesus is and the promises that he's given us, so that other people's eternities can be changed just like ours if we've come to follow Jesus. We've got to live it out wherever we are. We don't have to be a pastor or working at a church to be someone who shares truth and does all these things. God's called us to be all different things. Remember several months ago as we went through all the spiritual gifts? We are all many parts of one body that God has called to work together for his glory. And that one body is in different places and different occupations and doing different things. And wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we need to live it out wherever we are. And then we need to go out and share. Might be far away, might be close. Only God can direct us in that. But we've got to continue to pray to him to direct our paths on where to go out and share. I hope you've really grabbed some things from our friend Luke this morning and how he showed us different lessons on how to walk with Jesus. I hope you're able to apply them to your walk and share them with others. Would love to hear some stories about how some of these messages and how God's speaking through this time of walking with Jesus. Really look forward to sharing again with you next week. I hope you can be with us online or in person at the church. Don't forget about the Bible studies coming up this week. Don't forget about the women's retreat and game night coming up in October. God bless you. Have a great week.